Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining. My name is Theresa Kuhns, and I serve as Vice President of Government Affairs for the Southern Maryland Association of Realtors. I am honored to introduce our panelists today, Senator Ben Cardin, Senator Ben Hollen, President of SMAR Chris Hill. Thank you all for being here. The majority leader had a scheduling conflict and could not join us. I do appreciate everyone signing on and speaking with not only the front line of the Maryland housing market, but also one of the top revenue generators in Maryland, the realtor community. Let me first begin by recognizing what a tremendous responsibility you have shouldered as elected leaders, given the current state of our country. From the global pandemic and voting on bills which literally puts food on the table or roofs over the head of our Marylander friends, and to the civil unrest we have seen cripple our country's recovery efforts. Senator, specifically, what has been the toughest vote for you in 2020 since March? Have fun with that.
Well, first, Theresa, can I say hello and thank you very much? And Chris, thank you very much. It's good to be here with my colleague, Senator Van Hollen. We all are part of Team Maryland with Steny Hoyer, your federal congressional team. We're working very hard with Governor Hogan, with the county execs, with the local officials, the mayors, all the people we can for the state of Maryland. So this is a team effort. We very much value the real estate community and what you do. You are a critical part, not just of our economy, but the quality of life for the people in the state of Maryland. So we just want you to know you are a priority. So I'm going to answer your question in a somewhat different way. And that is, to me, the most difficult vote is the fact that we haven't had that vote. We haven't been able to vote in the United States Senate on critically important issues. We passed the CARES Act, which was one of the high points of this Congress. Bipartisan bill that responded to the COVID crisis on the healthcare needs, on the needs of individual families, on our economic needs, state and local government needs. And it was the right thing to do in March. But in March, we thought we would be back on track. By now, we're not. We need to pass the next chapter. And to me, the most, controversial thing or the most difficult thing is that we may go home in a couple of weeks and not pass a COVID bill. To me, that would be just wrong. And right now, the expectation is that we'll pass a continuing resolution to keep government open, but we're not going to pass year-long appropriation bills. To me, that's just wrong. So I think the frustration is that we can't get Democrats and Republicans together to deal with the healthcare crisis that we have in this country that's affecting not just real estate, it's affecting our way of life, it's affecting our healthcare, it's affecting our schools, it's affecting our economy. We need to act on that. And to me, that's been the most controversial thing that I've not been able to do.
Senator Van Hollen.
Well, Theresa, let me also start by thanking you and all your colleagues, to Chris Hill and the entire team as part of the Southern Maryland Association of Realtors. And as Senator Cardin said, you're a vital part of our economy and our communities. In fact, you know, my view is that you are in many ways sort of the early warning systems. You've got your eyes and ears in the community, and you often can sense how things are going through your interactions with people who are thinking of, you know, buying or selling real estate. So we value what you do, and we also really appreciate your input on so many issues, both regionally and statewide and nationally. Let me also just agree with Senator Cardin in his response. Look, we cast lots of votes. This past week, we cast a lot of votes on federal judges. Frankly, some of those are very difficult votes, trying to weigh whether or not a particular individual both has the qualifications and the temperament to be a lifetime appointment to the federal judge. So we have to look at each one of those. What has not been a difficult vote was the CARES Act. I mean, that was an important vote, but it was not difficult because at the end of the day, through a process of negotiation and bipartisanship and back and forth, we were able to put together an agreement. It was actually the one of three bipartisan votes that took place earlier this year as part of the emergency response effort. It was the biggest one. And I would just point out briefly that when Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, proposed his plan back then, it did not include 1 penny for state and local governments. It did not include 1 penny for schools. It did not include 1 penny for colleges, whether they're community colleges or four-year colleges. It did not include any money for additional SNAP food assistance. It did not include a whole lot of things. But at that time, he was willing, through hearing from folks around the country, to go back to the negotiating table, and that produced the CARES Act, which, while not perfect, was a very important relief measure. So like Senator Cardin, I've been very distressed by the fact that we can't even get a vote on the HEROES Act. I'm not saying the HEROES Act is important, and both Senator Cardin and I are willing to negotiate changes, but we want something that will not be a false sense of comfort for people. We want something that will be meaningful. And just like the original McConnell proposal for the CARES Act really didn't do anything of great meaning, our view is we need to keep at the negotiating table until we get something done for the American people.
And that segues directly into my next comment about the CARES Act, because it was such a huge historic moment for realtors. As you both know, it was the first time independent contractors were included in unemployment benefits. And that was a huge win for our industry and our association. PPP as well, with essential businesses here in Maryland, to help a lot of our brokers and friends keep going as a small business. While we're thankful for the optimistic signs of recovery, like you, we must also recognize that we have a loss of revenue at the state and local areas. And we are concerned for property owners and realtors to be targeted for additional fees or property taxes moving up. Negotiations, as you all mentioned, failed on the most recent package for HEROES. Could you expand on the key difference between the House and Senate version that we're looking at, and do either include funding for our state and local government?
So why don't I let Chris start this time, and then I'll start the next time. We'll rotate back and forth.
Thank you.
So let me just start with the last piece of that question. Do either include relief for state and local government? The answer is the HEROES Act passed by the House does both. Okay. The McConnell proposal does neither. There's not a penny in the McConnell proposal for state and local government, which is one of many reasons that we think it's inadequate. As I said earlier, the initial CARES proposal, McConnell's version of what became CARES, did not include a penny for state and local government either. It was only because of pressure and people calling from around the country that changed. His original proposal didn't include the UI provisions that you just mentioned that were so helpful to independent contractors. That was not part of McConnell's first CARES proposal either. So if you look at his current bill, it is very anemic. It's actually retreated from a proposal that the White House and even McConnell himself had put forward about 6 weeks ago. And the problem is that he's not able to get lots of his members of his caucus. This is not a partisan statement. This is what Senator McConnell has told us. He and Senator Graham and others have said that there may be as many as half the members of the Republican caucus that don't want anything. But that doesn't mean that something like the HEROES Act can't pass, because we would have an overwhelmingly positive vote among the Senate Democrats, and I think we'd win enough Senate Republicans to get a majority. But McConnell has not allowed us to have a vote on that. Okay. If not that, let's negotiate. The HEROES Act, it's hard to know where to begin. Everything that would be, I think, on your agenda for emergency relief is included in some form or fashion in the HEROES Act. It deals with rental assistance. I think one of the big issues on people's minds is we can have an eviction moratorium. We want to protect tenants, but we also have to recognize that landlords depend on those payments. And so as frankly, both on the homeowner side as well as the commercial side. And so if we're going to have a moratorium, which I think we should, we also need to be able to provide that relief. And by the way, the moratorium should apply to people specifically who are unable to pay because of the COVID emergency. But again, the McConnell bill doesn't include anything on that. The HEROES Act does. Food assistance, the HEROES Act has it. McConnell's is anemic. State and local, none. I could go down a very long list. Broadband, which I know is something we're going to be interested in talking about. The HEROES Act includes substantial resources for emergency build out of broadband to help both our schools, but also small businesses. McConnell bill, nothing. So this is why we've been interested in continuing negotiations till we can get something more meaningful.
Thank you.
I think Chris has covered it rather comprehensively. Let me just give you my observations. I really don't believe Senator McConnell's bill was a good faith effort. He has problems in his own caucus. We recognize that. But the bottom line is we need a bipartisan bill. We need Democrats and Republicans coming together. And Senator McConnell has not given us the leadership at this stage to be able to get into those negotiations. And that's why it's so important. Senator Van Hollen mentioned so many of the issues that were just totally left out of Senator McConnell's bill. I could add to that list, nothing substantial for the post office, certainly not enough to deal with the United States Postal Service, which is having serious challenges. Nothing for election security or to help our states deal with the cost of elections. Because of COVID-19, all of our jurisdictions are having additional costs associated with these elections. They don't have the resources. Their revenues are already down. They can't even afford their current budget, let alone additional costs. And of course, the most glaring absence was not anything whatsoever to help state and local government. And quite frankly, state and local government got help under the CARES Act because for direct COVID-related expenses, but didn't get any assistance in regards to revenue losses. As we know, the revenue sources for local government has really been very much adversely impacted, not just income tax revenues or sales tax revenues, as we know, are down, but also their special use revenues that they receive from hospitality, from tourism, from travel. All that is pretty much dried up. So they need that type of assistance. And as Senator Van Hollen said, we recognize the large number of homeowners and renters today that are in serious jeopardy of eviction and foreclosure. And yes, we can deal with some of these issues through moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures, but we really need to have a national strategy to recognize that COVID-19 needs a federal response. Part of that is the safety nets of unemployment insurance and the tax checks that were sent out that are helpful, but others is direct assistance to those homeowners and renters who need direct help. That's provided for in the HEROES Act. It's not provided for in the McConnell bill. What we need to do is sit down and negotiate, and I want to just underscore what Senator Van Hollen said. Speaker Pelosi has indicated that, and Senator Schumer has indicated, they're willing to come in. They recognize the bill they passed is the one they think is right, but they recognize it's not going to get to the finish line. So let's sit down and figure out a process and get this done. American families are desperate for Congress to come together with a bipartisan bill.
It certainly is a stark contrast when you hear about the HEROES Act versus what we're discussing right now. With that said, are there any predictions to if and when relief package may pass, or are we too close to the election right now to get this done?
Well, I guess the only thing I can predict is that there'll be election on November 3rd. I think it's quite clear that there's going to be a strong effort to get the members of Congress out of Washington back to their home states and districts as soon as possible. Our deadline of September 30th is for the fiscal year and some extenders. And while I know you're very much interested in the flood insurance issue that expires at the end of September. So we need to pass an appropriation bill or a continuing resolution or an omnibus bill, something to get us past September the 30th. We would have hoped that we would have passed the next round of COVID relief before we took our summer recess. That's when we thought it would happen. The House had passed the HEROES Act in mid-May. That's 4 months ago. So we thought for sure that by August, we would have passed the COVID package. Leader McConnell came out with a proposal right before we went into recess. And then when we came back from recess after Labor Day, he withdrew that proposal and put out something that was much smaller than that, moving in the wrong direction. So I think the Republicans are planning to try to recess in the next couple of weeks until after the elections without passing a specific COVID-related bill. That would be wrong. I hope that's not the case. I hope we'll sit down and negotiate it. I can tell you we're ready to do it now, and we're willing to compromise. But we need to get this bill done. To wait till November, there'll be many families that are going to suffer irreversible damage. Many businesses will not be in existence in November if we don't act. We've got to act now. It's urgent, and we're going to do everything we can to act. But at this particular moment, the prediction is that Leader McConnell is going to try to recess for the elections in the next couple of weeks without passing the COVID-related legislation.
And like what you said, our intel had said the early July unemployment numbers was going to lead the HEROES Act or whatever new act it was going to be prior to August recess. So to sit here in mid-September, it is a concern. We have a lot of families who are on the verge of losing their homes and not being able to make it. So I appreciate your comments. Chris, you're heavily involved in both our local and state public policy and government affairs programs. And when we talk about uncertainty of new taxes or proposed increases in real estate, how do you work with your clients on that new ethical boundary?
So, this is probably the longest I've ever been silent in history, and you know me that well, right? Theresa, you're absolutely right now, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but I really do want to take a minute in the middle of everything and publicly thank both of the senators for taking time to meet with us. Our association really does appreciate your voice, and having you on here is truly something unusual for us. So thank you very much for coming on with us. I really wanted to say that. Maryland is currently the number four outbound state in the country, meaning there's only 3 other states where more people are leaving at a more rapid rate: California, Illinois, and New Jersey. And I think as a realtor, one of the most disheartening things I can ever hear, and I hear it more than I should, is when I have a retiree telling me that they can no longer afford to stay here. And, future costs in real estate are a real problem for many people, including myself, right? And it's a hard sell, Theresa, when you meet with someone and you hear their concerns and they want to know what your crystal ball is telling them is going to happen in the future, when they know that people are leaving at record numbers and they're concerned, although things are all, nice and rosy in the sales world now, what's going to happen in a few years when the inventory's dried up, or if it isn't, or if there's more, and people are moving out. So it's a real hard sell. And I don't think there's a real answer at this point. It's just something that we need to kind of deal with on a daily basis.
Thank you for that. One of the struggles, and this also is a real estate struggle we have faced in Southern Maryland, is the regional approach to broadband. And this year's pandemic pivot to doing virtual webinars and virtual school. I have 3 boys who are doing virtual school. It's been fun, let me tell you guys. Telehealth. It's highlighted our region's lack of access, which is, to me, astonishing, given our proximity to you in Washington, D.C. We're so close to our nation's capital, and we can't connect as a region right now. The lack of connection also affects our housing market and sends potential home buyers to D.C. or Virginia. And with losing those tax dollars, that's a big issue for us as well with the state and local funding we've already discussed, our revenue loss. We're being told $10,000 to $20,000 per home to connect them, or $500 million regional investment to get secure broadband. We've piecemealed it together, and I constantly see great press releases from your staff, who we work with closely, about getting different grant funding, and we appreciate what you're doing in Capitol Hill to help us get that funding. Is there a better federal approach that we're not looking at to secure regional funding for either our area or other areas of Maryland that are missing broadband?
You want me to take a start at that, Ben? Okay. So first, with respect to Chris's remarks on rising costs, obviously there are lots of elements to that. This, though, is one of the reasons we have been pushing for more state and local relief as part of the next emergency package, because to the extent that states and local jurisdictions are experiencing dramatic shortfalls, they only have one of 2 choices, which is to dramatically cut services, which doesn't help your customers or our constituents, doesn't help which hurts your customer, or look at increases in revenue. And so that's another reason it's so important that we do another round of relief for state and local governments. I don't want to go back too far into ancient history, but the tax bill that passed a few years ago also removed, as you know, the deduction for state and local taxes. And, that hurts a lot of Maryland homeowners because they're no longer able to deduct those costs. It makes it more expensive, right, to live in Maryland, that federal tax bill. With respect to broadband, this is a huge issue, and Senator Cardin and I have been very, very active on this in all its dimensions. As we know, this is especially hitting our educational opportunities, right? Schools right now, because we still have most of our schools, and I've been following the Southern Maryland schools. I think Calvert may be heading back for some special ed next week, but anyway, it's a mix of things. But all of them are still going to require for some time distance learning. And even before this pandemic hit, one of the things I've been very focused on is what we used to call the homework gap, which is students who get assignments, but were unable to access high-speed internet to do their work. Now the homework gap has become a full-blown learning gap. I mean, it's not just homework, it's all day. And there are a number of factors here. One is the lack of, for hotspot devices where you still may have coverage. In many cases, it's the lack of actual device that a student can have, especially when others in the family need to be on for their purposes. And then, of course, there's the lack of actual high-speed connection at all. Now, the HEROES Act, I mentioned this, referred to this, the HEROES Act has $4 billion in it to expand access to high-speed internet, focused primarily for now on schools and connecting students, but there are also funds in there for rural connections to boost that. The biggest long-term, and this is where we should definitely follow up, the biggest long-term federal program is substantial. It's called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF. And this is a $20 billion fund administered by the FCC. Phase 1 is actually starting this year, phase 2 next year. Phase 1 will include about $16 billion. And right now in St. Mary's County, there are 613 census tracts that they say are available or eligible. In Calvert, 623, in Charles, over 3,000. So we should be coordinating on this. This is the major federal program right now for the further build out of high-speed internet. Now, some of us have had concerns because the way the FCC counts a census tract as being eligible is that if there's one household in that census tract that has high-speed internet, they're not eligible. So some of us have been saying, whoa, that's not a fair counting method. But even with that method, there are a lot of census tracts in Southern Maryland that are eligible, and we will work with you on the build out. So there's short-term, immediate relief, emergency relief as part of HEROES Act. And by the way, the CARES Act provided funds that are being used in Maryland, federal funds for schools especially. But the long-term thing for businesses and across the board is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Senator Cardin, any comments on broadband?
I would make a comment about what Chris Hill said and what Senator Van Hollen. Southern Maryland's a wonderful place to live. It's a unique spot. It is just incredible. And people want to live there. And they want their families to grow up there. And the economic opportunities are strong. But one of its principal challenges is infrastructure. The commute between Southern Maryland to DC can be a nightmare. So it's not just broadband, it's also highways and bridges that need to be fixed, replaced, and upgraded, transit systems. So we are very much committed to modernizing our infrastructure. I agree completely with Senator Van Hollen's comments on our delegation being so focused on using every tool available on broadband. There's not one answer to that. It's a combination of last mile connection that we have to get to, and we're using a lot of different tools under agriculture, under commerce, under the FCC, under COVID-19. Every place we can, we're using funds in order to advance last mile connection, but we also have the economic issues. It's not only the individual family's economic issues, it's the region, whether it's so rural that you can't, that the private companies don't want to provide the service because it's just not economical for the company. So we got to step in and make that a reality. it is essential that every home have broadband, have high-speed internet connection. And we have to make sure that's a reality in Maryland and throughout the country. And I can tell you, our federal delegation is very much focused on making that real in Maryland.
We appreciate that, including your comments. I think Southern Maryland is unique in many ways, including our 2 military installations. And with the comment on infrastructure, we're very blessed to have the Knights and Milton Bridge being replaced. And I know the Thomas Johnson Bridge is right behind that in terms of requirements for those who live in South Calvert and go over to Pax River. It's a real important key for us, and is also key for those who want to live in Southern Calvert. So it's a really good point. Chris, how does broadband affect your transactions? Do you have any horror stories or anything you want to impart on everybody? I think both senators realize the importance for our area for rural broadband.
No, I think that's the key. I mean, there's more than one story where, but I do want to comment that, the COVID situation has really kind of shined a light on this rural broadband issue, particularly for purchasers of new homes, right? Because now there's people at home and they're trying to educate their children and they have to have this. So I mean, I have people that are going in and how's the internet, right? Like that's the question. Can I what's here? Was there anything here at all? And you have to tell them there's you're 5 miles back from the main road. It's going to cost you a pretty penny to get something back here. So. I don't think there's any horror stories yet, but I do want to say that I think that people are really taking it more seriously, and it's a serious issue, a serious housing issue now. So,
and it's definitely been highlighted by this pandemic and how we access work and telehealth and school, obviously. It does seem every time we visit your offices during our mid-year conference up in May, we always end up talking about flood insurance extension. And you alluded to it earlier that we have a few weeks to go until yet another extension is required. So with as many blue line streams and coastal miles as we have in Maryland, we all know it's critical for our property owners here. Do you happen to think that we'll end up getting a reform done of that flood insurance and including privatization? Not just extension, but actual reform. That's something that we've hesitated in bringing to you in the Hill because we knew extension comes first, but eventually we do want reform.
Well, we're not going to get it done by September 30th. That's the next deadline. We got to make sure there's no lapse in the current program. So we have to make sure that we extend the program. We do need reform. You're exactly right. And the circumstances are a lot different today than they were when we first passed the federal flood insurance program. Privatization is certainly our goal. So yes, I think we would like to see the private market able to handle this. And where do we need to put the guardrails to make that a reality? So yes, there is a great deal of interest in working towards not just an extension, but a permanent solution so you can have stability and understand the circumstances, not in the real estate industry. So we pay a heavy price for the uncertainty. This way you would have the greater certainty. And I think it's something that is a realistic goal to accomplish in the next Congress. So we're very much interested in working with you and stakeholders to make that a reality.
Appreciate that. Senator Van Hollen?
Sure. As Senator Cardin said, the current flood insurance program authority expires at the end of this month. I know you're well aware of that, your colleagues, and obviously if that were to lapse, it would create a huge amount of uncertainty. We saw what happened a number of years ago, even for a very short lapse. A lot of closings didn't happen on schedule and some never happened at all. So I guess the relatively good news here in the short term is, as Senator Cardin said earlier, we do expect to be able to come together on a continuing resolution. The continuing resolution will have some measures attached to it that are urgent priorities, and I think we expect that the flood insurance authorization will be attached to that. And then, of course, the question is whether it's coterminous, whether the extension for flood insurance runs essentially to the same date as the continuing resolution, which is probably likely. That would not, again, provide enough time for reform given the elections in between. But I agree with Senator Cardin entirely. This is an area that needs reform. There's legislation that's been introduced that I'm a co-sponsor of that would reform the program. I do believe that greater privatization is an important component. I just remind people a number of years ago, after a reform bill was passed, it was a bipartisan reform bill, people scrambled back to try to change it. And changes were made because there was a sticker shock at the increase in pricing for some of these proposals. But my view is that this is something we have to do both to protect the taxpayer, but also to protect consumers and homeowners who have certain expectations built up. But reform's necessary. We should do it in a way that can smooth this out so that there are no big shocks all at once.
Absolutely. And as we know, tensions do run high in election year, and we do have this continuing resolution we need in the next 15 days. Do you think we'll be able to avoid any kind of shutdown prior to the election, given what's going on in all things 2020?
Yes, I think Senator Cardin and I both share the assessment that while there's unfortunately a lot of bad news out there in terms of gridlock or refusal to allow votes on things like the HEROES Act, the good news, at least for now, is that people recognize a government shutdown is a bad idea at any time, but especially at a moment like this, it would be especially catastrophic. So I do hope that cooler heads will prevail, and Senator Cardin and I can assure you that we're pushing hard for a continuing resolution. The main thing here is that people don't try to attach things to it that are extraneous and that do not have broad bipartisan consensus. Extending flood insurance is something that I think will have broad bipartisan consensus, but there are other things people are going to try to attach that could slow it down. So as Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over.
Well, we hope that continues to remain true. In our industry, you all may have heard keywords such as affordable housing, housing opportunity, workforce housing, and they all are building blocks to fair housing, something our association and industry has prioritized for over 50 years, from member trainings to education and to a general standard of practice. We are facing roadblocks with regards to a shortage of inventory right now, which is tied to zoning restrictions and additional transaction fees, which only has added to the rising cost of homeownership and brings us to an all-time low for homeownership in our country. And as you know, it only furthers our wealth equity gap across the board for all. You have been both instrumental in securing funding for Maryland for housing assistance, and for this, we thank you. However, as the CDC and the administration recently extended the national eviction moratorium, how are we going to work with you as our representatives? What is your suggestion to not only keep roofs over Marylanders' heads, but to keep the property owners financially stable and good financial standing, protect their rights, so they continue to offer that much needed housing to our communities?
Well, I can tell you this is a very important question. Our housing stock is not where it needs to be in this country. Affordable housing is beyond many families' abilities. And yes, we have certain tools available at the federal level, but they all need to be strengthened. And the good news is that we've had bipartisan support. For example, the largest single program for affordable housing in the United States from the federal government is a low-income housing tax credit. And we've had bipartisan support to expand that program and make it more relevant to all communities, including Maryland communities, because our income levels might be on average higher than the national. We still have serious issues on affordable housing. So we were able to change some of those numbers in the last reform of the low-income housing tax credit. But we also use other tools, new market tax credits, historic tax credits. We have neighborhood tax credits that are being proposed. So there are different things that we're using in order to try to beef up the ability of affordable housing. There is not one single tool. And as Senator Van Hollen said, we think our tax code should be sensitive to that. In some respects, it was not. In the 2017 reform, it was not favorable towards real estate, and that makes it even more difficult for affordable housing. So all that needs to be a factor. We changed the tax rates. That affects the housing stock of affordable housing. So all this is interrelated, and we need a national strategy to deal with affordable housing. The COVID-19, we're in triage right now.
Yes.
We're trying to save people their homes. You mentioned the moratorium. The moratorium that was imposed, you have to establish that you would become homeless, and then there's a moratorium. But it's a moratorium from eviction. It's not a moratorium from paying the rent. So ultimately, we got to figure out how people are going to be able to afford the housing they're living in. And property owners are entitled to get their investment. They have mortgages they have to pay. So it's the whole pipeline that has to be dealt with. And as Senator Van Hollen said, that's why we think it's relevant in a COVID package to deal with the realities of people who are vulnerable of losing their homes. And that's why the HEROES Act provides substantial help for renters, and we provided help for homeowners because we recognize that there is a national emergency, and we have to make sure that the resources are available. But it's the failure to have enough stock of affordable housing, as well as the affordability issue for the individual family. Both need to be part of a federal housing strategy. So one of the things I hope that we can come together is to recognize that having a safe, affordable housing is a fundamental for quality of life in America. And too many families are vulnerable today, and we need to make sure that we address that on the availability of housing as well as the affordability of housing.
Thank you. Senator Van Hollen?
Right. I second everything Senator Cardin said, and I would break this, as he did, into these two pieces. One is the immediate urgent situation, and then there's the ongoing chronic challenge of affordable housing. And the immediate situation is the fact that people are not able to make their rent payments because they have lost their jobs because of COVID-19, and we need to help them stay in their homes. But that also means making sure that the landlords receive the payments because they have bills to pay and they have debtors, they have creditors as well. Yeah. So it is the food chain needs to be dealt with because otherwise you're just going to create a huge amount of stress elsewhere in the system. So that's why we've been supporting this provision that introduced a bill in the Senate for emergency rental assistance, but it's also incorporated in the House HEROES Act. In the longer term, as you said, Senator Cardin laid out some of the incentives at the federal level for the production of affordable housing, the different kinds of tax credits. In addition, when it comes to production, there is a supply issue, as you say. And this is not just a federal issue. As you know, a lot of the supply issues do relate more to local zoning decisions. There are a number of federal proposals that have been introduced that would use sort of federal incentives and leverage on this question of zoning. But as you know, in the United States, local jurisdictions have been very, very careful to protect their authorities there. And, you know, there are lots of decisions that need to be made. But I think you're absolutely right to point to that as a factor here. And then finally, on the affordability side, it's obviously you increase supply. My view is you increase affordability. But we're also, at least on the Hill, we've had bipartisan support for continuing some of the federal housing subsidy programs, Section 8 and other programs, which allow more families to affordable housing, although there are huge waiting lists around the country when it comes to affordable housing. But we've been able, despite proposed cuts to those programs from the administration, there's been bipartisan agreement through our budgets to sustain those programs for the most part.
Well, yeah, inventory had a problem. I mean, it's been problematic since probably 2008 national crisis, as we know. I think in 2016, the National Realtors did a study, and Maryland alone had 260,000 single-family homes they were short of. And here we are 4 years later trying to find affordable housing for everybody at whatever their level of affordability is. It continues to be an issue, and local zoning will take any encouragement or incentives you guys can get passed in Capitol Hill. It will help us locally, and I would appreciate it for my role. Chris, I wanted to ask you if you can provide a market update for Southern Maryland specifically and how things look right now.
Of course.
Thank you.
The only thing I wanted to say is I did want to comment real quick a little bit on the conversation that's taking place here. I think it's important to also recognize that landlords are not always big corporations.
Mhm.
You know, particularly here with our military installations, we have a lot of veterans that purchase a home and they get transferred out, and it's not the right time for them to sell the home. So therefore the house, you know, they rent it out. Those people are struggling as well. So I think it's important to always, you know, keep that in the back of our minds that they need our assistance as well. So the market update, we've covered a lot of that, right? I currently say the word for 2020 real estate is inventory, right? And we've been talking about it constantly, and we continue to talk about it. We're currently operating at only 34% of the number of properties we had in 2019. So a third of the properties we had just 1 year ago. And we're like 21% of 10 years ago. So this is a trend that's been going on for a while now. And we really, and I think, you know, as you mentioned, a lot of this doesn't apply to the senators so much, but we need to really consider the restrictions we're putting on new development and planning. If not, our future generations, my son and my daughter, they're not going to have a place to call home here in Maryland. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, right? But it's real. And I'm concerned my son's never going to be able to afford a house in Maryland, really. And it breaks my heart, you know what I mean? Kind of, you know, growing up here, it's just not, it's not a good thing. And, you know, in our current market, one of the things that we're dealing with is many people are fighting over the same properties right now. So there's such a shortage that we're having multiple offers. And it sounds, you know, a lot of people think this is a great thing in the real estate world, right? Like that you know, you've got people fighting over a house and it's great. But the fundamental fact is that we have struggles and there's somebody that's going to miss out on it, right? And they have to find another home, and, you know, it may be a family, it may not, it may just, whoever it is, they have to have that opportunity, and it's not there. We have 1.25 months of inventory left. That's what we have in Southern Maryland. That is a third of what we had in 2019, right? 5 years ago, we had 8.5 months of inventory. So the reason I said 5 years is I didn't want us to like compare it to 10 years ago, you know, and kind of bring it in a little closer. 8.5 months just 5 years ago. At some point, this is going to become a serious issue, and this all affects many different things, right? So when we run out of inventory, tax revenue is affected too, right? Like this is a big issue, and we need to think about that. In closing, I did want to say one thing, Theresa, and that is, you know, particularly, I'm going to call out St. Mary's County for a second because that's where I live, and St. Mary's County is at a real disadvantage right now. The FHA limit is significantly lower than the surrounding counties. And this is something that I think, you know, we've talked about that our senators can probably help us with, I hope. So again, that's kind of where I am.
It's an unfair playing field, and we did talk about this with Majority Leader. We sat down with him literally 3 days before everything shut down in March about the FHA limit. It's about 200,000 less than both Calvert and Charles, Prince George's, can purchase. And with the military installation, the number of engineers we have and military families here, we do know the FHA limit is unfairly changing that market price and the market sales median price, as well as revenues in St. Mary's County. So I know that's something I'll follow up with both of your staffs. They've been wonderful to work with. I'd like to ask each of our senators to go ahead and give us some closing remarks, because we've reached the point of time to close up and wrap up. I see no questions in our chat. If anyone does have one, please go ahead and send it. But who would like to start with some closing remarks today? I'll get you out of here on time and early.
Well, Theresa, one of the burdens of being the senior senator, I usually get called on first, but that has its advantages and disadvantages. But thank both of you, and it's let me tell you, we have a great federal team that I work with in Southern Maryland. I just really want to shout out to Steny Hoyer. He is a great congressman. He's a great national leader, but he's a great congressman, and he fights so hard for the counties of Southern Maryland. I've been in some of the rooms where he led the fight on preserve the military installations in Southern Maryland. And I've seen him fight for the transportation dollars and in so many different areas that he's been fighting for the people of Southern Maryland. And it's great to have Chris Van Hollen as my partner in the Senate. So Chris serves on the Appropriations Committee and has been leading the fight on many of our funding issues that affect the quality of life in Southern Maryland, a lot of the infrastructure issues that we've been talking about. So I just really want to underscore that and underscore the point of what we started. We only have a few months left of this Congress. And I would like to see two things done in the next couple of weeks. I would like to see us deal with the COVID-19. I say that because it's affecting it's affecting everything in life. Our children going to school, it's affecting people's health decisions, people's travel decisions, small businesses, large businesses, real estate, everyone's affected by it. So we got to give it the attention it needs. And that's why we've talked a good deal in this conversation about what needs to be included in the next COVID-related package. And I'd like to see it a strong bipartisan vote signed by the president. I think we can get there if we sit down and put the people's interests first. So that to me is a realistic goal that we should be able to achieve. And the second thing, and I said this a little bit earlier, I'm confident we'll pass a continuing resolution before the end of the month. We're not going to shut down the government. But we should give you the predictability of a full year appropriation on these issues. And the tragedy here is the Democrats and Republicans have agreed on the numbers for full year appropriations. We just haven't gotten the politics to work out the details. And that needs to end. We need to give the predictability of a full year budget. But then I hope we can get beyond the immediate needs and look at what type of policy do we want in our country. Chris Hill is raising some very valid points on inventory. And it's not only people being left out, it's people aren't getting their real preference on housing because there's just not enough out there to get their preference. So they're settling for something less than they really want. And that's going to lead to instability and change and moving and things like that. That's not the most efficient thing for our community. So we do need to address the issue of affordable housing in this country. We need to, of housing in this country. It's all part of the housing continuum of supply, and we need to make sure we have that in America because what Chris Van Hollen said earlier, it's absolutely accurate. So goes real estate, so goes our economy.
Yes.
We know that. So we know that the real estate industry, there's a lot more we could do to make it stronger for the future, and we should take those steps now because it takes time. You can't automatically turn on the amount of housing in this country. It takes time to do that. So as we look at changes in the tax code, let's be sensitive to what impact it has on the real estate community. And I can go through chapter and verse in Senate Finance Committee, a lot of the issues that I've gone over with your national groups on real estate to recognize that it has a direct impact on the decisions we're talking about today. So it's not just the specific programs, it's not just the appropriation programs, it's not just the flood insurance, it's also what are the underlying underpinnings of our incentives in our tax code to deal with owning homes and building affordable housing. So I hope that we can get back to those discussions. And I can tell you, Chris Van Hollen and I are very fortunate that we live close to the nation's capital. We have great stakeholders in real estate that are in our state that we can rely upon. So you're all part of our team. We need your help. Let's get the job done. It's an honor to represent you in the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Senator Van Hollen.
Well, thank you, Theresa and Chris, and to all your members. And as Senator Cardin just said, we do consider you a part of Team Maryland. You help bring us information about what's happening and also ideas for how to improve the situation, both in Southern Maryland, the state of Maryland, and nationally. So we're really grateful to you and your members. And as I said at the outset, I've always found that realtors are also very involved in just helping their community activities in a whole range of ways. So thank you for that. And it's great to be part of the Team Maryland on Capitol Hill. And I want to salute Senator Cardin for all his work for many years. It's just a joy to serve with him in the United States Senate. He brings together the Maryland delegation. And of course, Steny Hoyer has been a a great representatives for Southern Maryland, and we're going to continue to work with you on maintaining those federal investments, which are so important, whether it's Pax River, Indian Head, a number of other major federal investments in Southern Maryland. Like Senator Cardin, I really do hope that we're able to come together as a House and Senate and work out an emergency COVID response bill before we leave. I do think it's really important. I think the country's hurting. I think we need it both for healthcare reasons and fighting COVID with expanded testing. And we also know that the economic fallout is continuing to be very painful, and we need to address that. I also hope, and I do believe, we'll be able to get through on the continuing resolution. And then the longer term, Senator Cardin mentioned earlier that with respect to infrastructure, that broadband is vital, and we're focused on that in the near and long term. But there's also the transportation infrastructure. We've worked very closely as a delegation on other projects like the Maryland 5 Great Mills Improvement Project, on the Thomas Johnson Bridge, on Southern Maryland rapid transit proposals, and others. And so we look forward to continue to work with you on those issues. And then the fundamental other issue of affordable housing access to greater supply and affordability is a very pressing issue, as you've described. And I look forward in the short term. I know Senator Cardin and I will both work with Steny Hoyer in his office as well on the FHA loan limit with respect to St. Mary's County. That's something very specific that we can work on. But then more broadly, we look forward to working with you on expanding access to affordable housing for Marylanders and Southern Marylanders. So thank you all very much for having us today. And it's good to be with my friend Senator Cardin as part of this conversation.
Well, we appreciate you both and your time, and we appreciate being on Team Maryland. We certainly love our state and our region specifically. It is a unique place. As we reach our hour mark, thank you everyone who joined us today. Your time is valuable. We appreciate it. On behalf of SMAR, we certainly hope you back in your office very soon next year, crowded into the conference rooms like we have always been every May in person. For our members, please go ahead and visit our website and social media to sign up for any featured events coming up, including our annual wine reception next week held at Port of Leonardtown. Thank you all for being here today. Take care.